Today we're going to look at a video from the Gravel Institute, which I guess is now waging a war on Prager University. That's a whole other story. I got a request to look at this video from the Gravel Institute. And it's called, "Is Big Government Really the Problem?" I would say we shouldn't be thinking about this in terms of big government versus small government, but rather proper government versus improper government. Remember, folks, the proper role of government is the protection of individual rights and property rights. And usually, when you analyze things, especially when it comes to economics, you can look at areas where the government intervenes in the economy, violates property rights, does stuff that they should not be doing, either through economic planning or even social engineering. And you can look at the consequences of the government's actions, the consequences, the distortions, the externalities. So that's how I would frame it. Proper government versus improper government. But let's check out what this video has to say.
There's one thing Americans can agree on.
Okay, so this is Brianna Gray Joy. And as you can see, she is a contributing editor at Current Affairs magazine. And for those who don't know, Current Affairs, or as I call them, Commie Affairs, is one of these organizations that I call a socialist hipster internet tabloid, or in short, shit. And here's a telling article. I just want to bring this up really quick. This is actually a really telling article. It's the difference between liberalism and leftism, written by Nathan J. Robinson. And this is who Brianna Gray works with. So Nathan J. Robinson says the leftist sees capitalism as a horror and believes in so long as money and profit rule the earth, human beings will be made miserable, blah, blah, blah. The liberal does not actually believe this. Rather, the liberal believes that while there are problems with capitalism, it can be salvaged if given a few tweaks here and there. Leftists, he goes on to say, leftists believe that the machine is not broken, rather it is working perfectly well. The problem is that it's a death machine designed to chew up human lives. You don't fix the death machine, you smash it to bits. And this is who Brianna Gray works for. Don't mean to play guilt by association here. Don't mean to assume anything about Brianna Gray's views. But I think one could say that the company she keeps is, might be telling.
We value democracy.
All right, let's back up. How'd she start?
There's one thing Americans can agree on.
What's that?
We value democracy.
Democracy. Okay, this again. It's a recurring topic I constantly have to address now. Democracy, in that we have the democratic elements of voting on political leaders like governors, presidents, and senators, but not democracy in that everything is up for a popular vote, and that you can't vote money out of my bank account, you can't vote away my property, you can't vote which color I'm allowed to dye my hair, can't vote which car I'm allowed to drive, can't vote on which words I'm allowed to say. So, again, constitutional republic with democratic elements. But America was never designed to be a democracy, because democracy kind of sucks. At least pure democracy.
And in a democracy, leaders are elected by the people to represent the people's interests.
To represent the people's interests. What if people have terrible interests? What if they're voting in leaders who are going to impose their will, who are going to violate rights? Whether it be communist goons, whether it be theocratic shit stains, or fascists. That's what wannabe central planners and philosopher kings, they say, look, I'm representing the will of the people. Because the will of the people is never wrong, right, Brianna?
One person, one vote. So why does everyone agree that the government doesn't really work for us? Conservatives have an easy answer.
Well, the government does work for us, and I would say that people get the government that they deserve. Is big government really the problem? Here we go.
Government is the problem. They say the government infringes on people's freedoms and is constantly getting bigger.
Yeah, that's true. It's pretty clear. Government does infringe on people's freedoms in a variety of ways.
They say that if we just defund expensive government,
And big government is a consequence of that. Let's back it up here.
getting bigger. They say that if we just defund expensive government programs, we could lower taxes for the average American.
And yeah, that's a problem. When you expand government's role in life, when you delegate the responsibility of economic planning and social engineering to the government, they're going to eventually have to raise taxes to hire people to enforce their laws, whether it be police, enforcing things like drug laws, blue laws, anti-prostitution laws, or government regulators. You're going to have to hire more bureaucrats, inspectors, investigators, prosecutors. Not to mention the regulatory cost that ends up driving up the cost of products and services. It's like in California, a point I like to make, there's a housing shortage in the state of California. And according to multiple sources, the cost of building a new house, especially in bigger cities like LA, San Diego, and San Francisco, 45% of the cost of building new housing is jumping through regulatory hoops. And as a result, housing shortage. And as a result, higher prices for housing.
With that money back in the hands of ordinary people, they say, people can handle their problems on their own. But there's a big problem with that. It's just not true.
Well, people should handle their problems on their own. It shouldn't be government's responsibility to solve all of your problems. Now, if your rights are being infringed on, if your rights are being violated by other people in society, then yeah, government is responsible for that problem. But I would say that government trying to solve your problems is what gives government the right, the authority to tell you what to do and how to live. And this is a point I used to make. I used to make the point that a problem with Medicare for all, with universal health care, with socialized medicine, whatever the fuck people want to call it, is that once we get it, we are going to we're going to have things like regulations and taxes on things like junk food, sugar, alcohol, tobacco, maybe dangerous activities. In fact, here I got a video of it, me mentioning this, because this already happened in Denmark. So, good news for Denmark. For a while, Denmark had a fat tax to help encourage healthier eating, which ended up failing. But I did mention this on a recent video, that if we ever get socialized medicine in America, that healthy foods will become regulated or taxed out of existence. Now, people often... Because once you start funding hospitals and doctors and clinics with tax dollars, eventually people are going to say, look, a lot of people are getting, a lot of people are becoming obese. They're getting heart-related problems and diseases related to eating unhealthy. So we're going to have to resort to fascism to make sure that everyone eats healthier. Now, some of you at home might be saying that this is what is called a slippery slope argument, but we already saw that slope slip in Denmark. And on top of that, we're already seeing it slip in the United States. We've seen it all year with the way that government has handled COVID, because they said we need to reduce burden on hospitals. We need to flatten the curve. We need to slow the spread. So let's resort to economic fascism with business lockdowns and mask mandates and other efforts. So the slope is already slipping. And the point is that when government tries to solve problems like unaffordable health care and unaffordable health insurance, and you give them that responsibility, well, before long, they're going to say, look, we got to, you can't be eating that double cheeseburger. You can't be eating that bacon cheeseburger. You can't be drinking that tall IPA. You can't be huffing and puffing on that e-cigarette, because in 10, 15, 20 years, that's going to cause you health problems. And then you're going to be a burden on the hospitals. Therefore, you're going to be a burden on the taxpayers. And this is what happens when government tries to solve problems that they should not be solving, or at least trying to solve.
Sure, the US government is big, but not as big as it used to be. As a percentage of the economy, federal spending is smaller now than it was in 1954.
I don't know if federal spending as a percentage of the economy is a good way of assessing this, because government was still big in 1954, and you can make this argument, but at the same time, in 1954, we did not really have a Department of Education, or at least the one that was established in the 1970s, whose budget has quadrupled ever since its existence. Ever since it was brought into existence, that is. The war on drugs was not as intense, and now we see the consequences of the war on drugs. We didn't have NSA, we did not have the Patriot Act, we did not have the EPA. So I don't know, we didn't have Medicare and Medicaid yet in 1954. And on top of that, I imagine that a lot of this spending was going to pay off the debt for, I don't know if you guys remember this, but in the 1940s, America was involved in this war. You might have heard of it. It was called World War II, which afterward they were lending other countries money through things like the Marshall Plan and whatnot. And but anyway, so I don't think this is a good way to paint a picture of how involved government is in everyday life.
And the US spends less on government than other countries, like Germany or Finland, that have lower rates of poverty and higher rates of economic mobility. The American dream is more alive in these big government countries than in America. And there's no truth to the claim that the bigger...
By what standard? Now, it is true that a lot of these, quote-unquote, bigger government countries that have a more generous welfare state, they are free in other areas. From what I know about banking, the Canadian banking industry is a lot less regulated than in the United States. Is that something that that Brianna Gray wants? Does she want less banking regulation?
No, of course not.
So yeah, some of these countries do things better than the United States.
The bigger the government, the less free the people. In fact, the countries at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank, ranks as freer than the United States. Countries like Sweden or Denmark have much larger governments relative to their populations than the United States. A large government doesn't mean an unfree population.
Also, going back to the 50s argument, I notice both conservatives and the left now like to point to the 50s as this like golden age. The left likes to call it an economic golden age. Of course, when conservatives point to the 50s and how, oh my God, the nuclear family, more people were going to church, more people were friendly, there wasn't all this degeneracy and counterculture nonsense. When the conservatives do it, then people say, well, what about racism? What about Jim Crow? What about all these other problems in society? But now the left is like, man, the 50s were great. She's actually about to expand on that point.
You see, government isn't a problem in and of itself.
She's right.
In a country as sprawling and diverse as America, there needs to be an institution to build infrastructure and inspect food and to put...
Okay, so that's the proper role of government, is to build infrastructure. Why can't infrastructure be privatized? Look at the railroads that were built in the 19th century. The subsidized and heavily regulated railroads were a lot shittier and a lot less efficient than the more private and privately funded railroads, namely the Northern Pacific, built by James J. Hill. Same thing with shipping. Same thing happened in the shipping industry in the early 19th century. The private shipping companies outperformed the public shipping. Anyway, so infrastructure, I think, could be privatized. I don't know why they can't be privatized. But food inspection. Do we really need the government to inspect our food? Okay, so if a restaurant or a store sells you some bad food and says, no, this food is good, it's good to go, and then they sell it to you and then it gives you diarrhea, yeah, maybe you could sue them for fraud. But history has shown that that private food inspectors do a better job than the government, or at least the food industry is good at regulating themselves. This is a story from NPR that talks about how a lot of the major retailers are increasingly relying on independent third-party certifiers to make sure their products are safe. So if I walk into a Costco and pick up some fish, some tilapia or shrimp, Costco has mandated that all of its suppliers provide what is called a certificate of analysis. This indicates that the product has come from facilities that have the best practices in place, blah, 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 blah. This was a story about how even before the shutdown, food supply regulated itself. And another example I like to point to is Chipotle. Because I don't know if you guys know this, but it's not in a food company, whether it's a restaurant or a grocery store. It's not good business to poison their customers. And you saw this with Chipotle, who, Chipotle, if you guys don't remember, between like 2014 and 2017, they were constantly dealing with E. coli cases, E. coli outbreaks. And if you look at the history of their stock value, it goes up and up and up and up. And then around 2015, it peaks at about $7.48 a share. And then it just goes down for like 3 years before it starts coming back up. I remember when this happened at the time, you could attribute it to all of the bad press about the E. coli at Chipotle. And this I believe, even happened to Jack in the Box back in the 80s or 90s. So yes, food companies do have an incentive. They have a selfish incentive just based on economics alone to sell their customers quality food. At least stuff that doesn't make them sick right away. Now, of course, like eating too many French fries. If you eat French fries like every day for 10 years, you're probably going to have health problems. But like one little thing of French fries, like what, once a month? That's not going to kill you. But yeah, so I guess it's just infrastructure and food inspection, not police, military, courts.
Put out fires. To do things
Oh, put out fires, okay.
that help our communities, even if they don't turn a profit.
Even if they don't turn a profit. Well, profit is a result of production and free trade. And I think profit is a good thing. And someone needs to produce stuff. Again, a lot of critics of capitalism, anti-capitalists, they talk as if stuff in a society just exists, just popped out of nowhere. And therefore, we get to collectivize it and divvy it up after we vote on how it gets divvied up. Forget about how it was made.
Think of the U.S. Postal Service, which provides hundreds of thousands of good jobs while allowing
Apparently that's why the post office was created, to provide jobs.
people to cheaply mail packages across the country.
Cheaply mail packages across the country. Well, now we have the private sector doing that through UPS and FedEx. Not to mention things like email, right? Email's been around for what, 2.5 decades? A lot of people probably take this for granted, but I remember when Gmail was brand new. You had to know someone who had an account to refer you, and it was like, oh my God, 1 gigabyte of storage? I can use this as like a backup hard drive, essentially. And I know people who did that when it first came out. 1 gigabyte storage. I think that was like 2004, 2005. Anyway, email. When's the last time you saw someone writing down a letter and then folding it up and stuffing it in an envelope and licking a stamp, and then sending it and writing and pen pals and shit? I mean, people don't even use email anymore. We use text message and video phones and just talking on the phone. So, but on top of that, you have FedEx and UPS. So, but yeah, thank goodness for the post office. We wouldn't be able to send stuff, apparently.
Or think of Medicare and Medicaid.
Medicare and Medicaid.
Which are credited with having saved millions of lives.
Credited to having saved millions of lives. Also made healthcare more expensive, especially for non-Medicare recipients who were not insured, by merely stimulating a demand in an industry where supply is very difficult to increase. Not to mention, it takes money from people who are working. It imposed a new tax on working people. It destroyed, or it worsened whatever is left of the health insurance market. Not to mention the price controls on doctors and clinics and hospitals. You know, if they're forced to accept Medicare patients at a discount, who do you think they're gonna pass that cost on to, folks?
That's a mystery.
On top of that, waste and whatnot, but it's amazing. Medicare, apparently. Let's forget all the problems and distortions it's created.
So, the problem isn't the size of government, It's who controls the government.
I would say the problem is government does too much stuff that they should not be doing.
The reason it feels like our politicians don't work for us is because, well, they don't.
I mean, they still technically do.
Republicans and Democrats alike are working for the people who line their wallets instead. That's not
Line their wallets.
just my politics. That's the academic consensus.
The academic consensus.
In 2014, a Princeton University study found that economic elites and organized groups representing business interests have substantial independent impacts on U.S. government policy. More than that, they found that the desires of regular people have zero impact on policy adoption. Not a little impact, not barely any impact, no relationship at all.
Now, this also ignores, I would say this is also a result of the mixed economy of government intervention, social engineering. When you have a mixed economy, then it becomes a state of pressure group warfare. And yes, people with more money and more resources are probably going to be able to get more political pull. And I would say the solution to that is get government out of the economy altogether and out of the business of social engineering.
And it's a truth that has been understood since the founding of the United States. Thomas Jefferson wrote of his desire to crush in its birth the aristocracy of our moneyed corporations.
Okay, well now do Jefferson's thoughts on the general welfare clause, because you're not going to like it, Brianna.
But blinded by swanky dinner parties and big donations, some politicians have forgotten his words. The top ranks of both parties today are filled with billionaires, banking executives, and wealthy lobbyists. Corporations regularly give money to politicians on both sides of the aisle, guaranteeing their influence no matter who wins an election. Whoever wins, you lose.
And yeah, you can see this. I mean, it does happen. You see this with the FDA and how a lot of big corporations, big pharma, they get favors by locking out competition. But it also makes drugs more expensive because of the rigorous regulatory hoops you have to jump through just to bring a new drug or a new product to market. But then it's also not entirely true, because a lot of times government, I mean, the existence of antitrust alone. If politicians were easily bought, then wouldn't Sherman antitrust have gone out the window a long time ago so that corporations would not have to be worried about getting broken up? I mean, shit, I just read a story a couple weeks ago about how back in 2005, Blockbuster was considering buying another major video rental retail chain. And they didn't do it because the thought of getting targeted for antitrust alone was enough to discourage them. So they didn't even get charged on antitrust, but they're like, oh, well, we don't even want to deal with this, so we're not going to do it.
With a government under the control of corporations and the rich, the system has been rigged completely in their favor.
Yeah, completely in their favor. Again, look at antitrust. Look at California. Again, AB5. I mean, Uber and Lyft did get a proposal on this upcoming ballot to vote away AB5, to exempt them from AB5. But you would think if the California Democrats were in the back pockets of big, greedy corporations, AB5 never would have come into existence in the first place.
In the 1950s, when the economy was growing faster than ever.
See, the 50s, now was this wonderful time, according to our friends on the so-called left. The 50s, what a wonderful time.
The richest people in the country paid an income tax of 91%.
Now, from what I know, they did not actually pay that rate. That was the marginal tax rate. And the effective tax rate was much lower.
Uh-oh, SpaghettiOs!
The corporate income tax was above 50%. But after decades of tax cuts for the rich, the 400 richest Americans pay a lower tax rate than the bottom 10%.
Now, this is just nonsense. I say this all the time, or I say this a lot. The top 1% pays 35% of the income tax, the federal income taxes. Doesn't mention state income taxes, especially in places like California, where I think California has the most progressive tax rates in the country in comparison to other states. But and on top of that, the top 10% pays the 70% of the federal income taxes. Top 50% pays 98% of the federal income taxes. So this notion that the richest of the rich pay lower taxes is just a flat out lie.
Corporations, elites, and the politicians they control will justify this inequality by saying that different rules for them mean more wealth for all. But
I mean, in a free country, in a free economy, there would be a lot more wealth there'd be a lot more wealth created.
recent history shows that's not the case. While American
But yeah, with a mixed economy, it's a lot more difficult to create wealth.
workers have become dramatically more productive, their wages have stagnated or fallen. The average hourly wage was higher in 1974 than it was in 2018. This has led to a stark gap in qualities of life. From 1989 to 2018, the wealthiest 1% of Americans increased their total net worth by $21 trillion.
And it also grew by 500,000 people. And you know why that is because the population grew by 50 million people. Again, this whole 1% nonsense is totally arbitrary. And by the way, did they just take that wealth from other people? How do they accumulate that wealth? Or is it a representation of their net worth, which again is tied up in stocks, which again may or may not be inflated due to Federal Reserve policy and government intervention and finance?
The bottom 50%, meanwhile, saw their net worth decrease by $900 billion.
Yeah, so the same 1% in 1989 is not the same 1% today. Same 50%, the bottom 50% is not the same bottom 50% today. So they want you to think of things in terms of class warfare.
The rich got richer, the poor got poorer. For too long, we have been presented with a false choice. Big government versus small government.
Yeah, to a certain extent, she's right.
We're right to be skeptical of the people who lead us. They don't work for you or for me. But it's not because government is big. It's because it's bought. I'm Brianna Gray, contributing editor at Current Affairs magazine for the Gravel Institute.
Commie affairs. And I would say that the problem is that people have accepted this premise that government should be involved in our lives, that government should be involved in planning the economy, at least to a certain extent, and social engineering. And the solution is to reduce government to its proper role, which is the protection of individual rights and property rights.